Hello ladies, MBs and gents. This is the second of my responses to Noel Plum. Apologies for the delay, I have been very busy.
But one of the things that happened with the old Atheism Plus things that I took the biggest objection to is that they were involved in, you could call it movement atheism in the United States. And part of movement atheism in the United States, really part of the main functional role of that was supposed to be to provide support, right, to people leaving religion.
First things first, I want to make clear that this video is not really about Atheism Plus. I will be addressing YouTube atheism's weird obsession with Atheism Plus in a future video. I've only included this reference here because Noel Plum is one of a significant number of YouTube atheists who seems to believe that Atheism Plus was the first and only attempt to address secular issues intersectionally. As such, it's difficult not to address it, at least partially, in this video.
Okay, which is a great thing, and it's something that you don't really need in England, do you? But you can understand why it's needed in the United States, of course.
Yes, it's an important social justice issue.
But this is the problem that I had with their approach, and I want to contrast this aspect of their approach to what was happening on YouTube back in the day, was that they had a very, very politically exclusive outlook, and they wanted to impose that, and they saw other atheist groups or atheist related groups, right? Humanist groups, secular groups, skeptics groups, which are not strictly speaking atheist groups, but they're kind of related to these things and providing in some ways the same kind of support services, is that they saw that they weren't making the same kind of socio-political ideological demands. They were letting people in to these things that held views that they found objectionable.
I really need to interject here, as Noel Plum seems to be more than a little ignorant of what humanism is, and more specifically the policies that mainstream humanist groups not only hold currently, but have held for a long time, long before Atheism Plus was ever a thing. To quote the International Humanist and Ethical Union, "Our vision is a humanist world, a world in which human rights are respected and everyone is able to live a life of dignity. We work to build and represent the global humanist movement that defends human rights and promotes humanist values worldwide." The IHEU also state that they are promoting freedom for all and the elimination of discrimination on grounds of ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, caste, and all other irrelevant grounds. Unsurprisingly, therefore, they have articles on their website advocating for feminism. They also state, "You can be an atheist but not believe in right and wrong, then you wouldn't be a humanist." The American Humanist Association have also had a feminist caucus since 1977, long before Atheism Plus ever reared its head. Like it or not, the recognition of the fact that secular issues intersect and interact with other human rights issues is something that predates Atheism Plus by decades. Further, the political exclusion of certain atheists by virtue of them not recognizing the aforementioned social justice issues is something that humanist organizations have been doing for decades. Contrary to Noel Plum's assertion that this is something that all started when Atheism Plus came along with its supposedly insidious agenda. Mainstream humanist groups very much made socio-political and ideological demands of their members long before Atheism Plus supposedly pressured them to, as Noel Plum would have us believe. It's not escaped my notice that the nonsensical phrase, "I'm not a feminist, I'm a humanist," has been more than a little prominent in this area of the internet over the last few years. It demonstrates a severe lack of understanding as to the meaning of both words. It's also important to note that if Noel Plum is capable of recognizing that skeptic groups and secular groups are not strictly atheist groups, but that they have some relation to atheist groups, why can he not recognize that the same stands for social justice groups? It's not escaped my notice that opponents of intersectionality often try to argue that intersectionalists are somehow trying to force issues to intersect and interact with one another, rather than what they are actually doing, which is recognizing that they do intersect and interact with one another. There's an all too common appeal to pedantry prevalent among YouTube atheists that atheism is just a lack of belief in gods. Nothing more, nothing less. And while I don't disagree with that in strict literal terms, in practical terms, being an atheist ends up meaning a lot more than that when viewed in the context of the reality we live in. For example, if you're an atheist who had a strict religious upbringing, then your being an atheist not only means that you lack a belief in gods, but that you also applied a certain scepticism to the notion of gods. This is why I have no problem with accepting that scepticism and atheism are related topics, despite the strict literal definition of atheism including nothing about scepticism whatsoever. On a similar note, if you're an atheist who wishes to self-actualise, i.e. live a complete and fulfilling life, then any prejudice you receive for being an atheist will obviously present a definite threat to that. As such, a natural consequence of any prejudice you experience as an atheist in the society you live in will lead you to the position of secularism, i.e. the belief that people should have both freedom of and freedom from religion in equal and balanced measure. People should be able to practice their religion, but only to such an extent as it doesn't interfere with someone else's practice of their religion, or with someone's choice to abstain from practicing any religion. Essentially, the understanding that the public sphere should be a religiously neutral space, granting no religious privilege. This is why I have no problem with accepting that secularism and atheism are related topics, despite the strict literal definition of atheism including nothing about secularism whatsoever. Noel Plum seems to agree with me here. Perhaps he would even think I've over-explained these connections. Yet when it comes to matters pertaining to social justice, for some reason the connection seems to go over the heads of a significant number of people within YouTube atheism, including him. For women, religions such as the main Abrahamic three, Christianity, Judaism and Islam, impose some very restricting rules by which women are expected to live. For LGBTQ folk, such religions denounce them as heathens, even going so far as to assert that they be put to death. For such people, becoming an atheist may finally allow women to start exploring the ways in which they can go about living their lives outside of the patriarchal restrictions of the Abrahamic religions. For LGBTQ folk, becoming atheists may well be a significant step in realising that they needn't deny or repress their sexuality and or gender identity. This is why I have no problem with accepting that social justice and atheism are related topics, despite the strict literal definition of atheism including nothing about social justice whatsoever. Being an atheist is not an experience one has in a vacuum. Indeed, if it were, there would be no need for communities or movements or even for the word itself.
And they would stand behind this kind of tagline of saying, how can we share a venue with people who believe that homosexuality is immoral, for example, right? And while I have some understanding of that, because I have the same kind of views on homosexuality as they have, the difference in perspective is this, is that I look at the kind of support that was needed in the United States and still is, and realise that the people that need the support the most, Andy, are not the people who are living in somewhere like fucking New York who come out as an atheist. It's people who are living in Bible Belt areas. And their views of religion are liable to go one way, but there are a whole basket of social issues which they're not likely to be on board with the atheism, plus the Greta Christinas of this world, let's say, and the PZ Myers of this world. And it's a big enough thing, Andy, for them to be able to strike down one of those boxes at once. And if the box that they strike down is getting on top of their religious belief and challenging it, and that might be that might be something that's taking a process that might have taken them 10 years to finally be able to come out to themselves and say, no, I actually don't believe in God. You know, it's going to take it's a big thing to do if you've based everything and the ability of the thoughts of an afterlife and that God's there and he's looking out for you to say, no, actually, I'm abandoning all of that. I'm kind of here on my own now. And that's a big enough thing on its own. That's the kind of person that's going to need support and the kind of person that's going to need support in their community. And you can't expect them the very same day to be on board with all these other issues.
Noel Plum seems to be implying here that gay people come from the northern United States and that homophobes come from the southern United States. At no point in this spiel where he essentially opines, won't someone please think of the homophobes, does he factor in the experiences of gay people living in the southern United States. He seems more content to compare apples to oranges, i.e. northern gay atheists to southern homophobic atheists, rather than consider all the potential participants in play here. Further, what exactly does Noel Plum think is so hard about the recently deconverted atheists from the Bible Belt being on board with all these other issues? Let's be clear here. At an atheist conference, not being homophobic simply means respecting the gay people there. Respect that, whether or not you are interested in listening, they have every reason to be given a platform at these events to discuss religion and homophobia. Respect that it is not appropriate to refer to them with any homophobic slurs. That's basically it. Similar with feminism. Respecting that whether or not you are interested in listening, women have every reason to be given a platform at these events to discuss religion and sexism. Respect that it is not appropriate to refer to women with misogynistic slurs, and that it is not appropriate to sexually harass women at these events. That's basically as feminist as these people are being expected to be. They aren't being expected to contribute to discussions about the pay gap, or the representation of women in video games, or any of the other topics there is so often drama about. Similar with trans people, just respect their gender identities. That's it. You don't have to understand the issue on any particularly deep level. Just accept that if a person prefers a certain set of pronouns, then that's their preference, and it should be respected just as any cis person would expect their pronouns respected. Noel Plum seems to be implying that these very basic acts of respect are some huge ask, and that it's simply unreasonable to expect this of the average grown adult.
You know, so it might be, if what you really want to do is to support people coming out of religion, which is perhaps the biggest function that these societies would have with regard to atheism in the United States, is to provide that kind of support, to then deny that support to the very people that need it most on the grounds that they're not on board on all these other issues, which is what they said. They made statements, and I could link you them saying things like, if you're not on board with these issues, we don't want you. Go and find your own spaces. You know, fuck off, effectively.
If Noel Plum wants to argue that the people he's talking about need this support the most, i.e. more than the women and minorities for which these spaces are being made, he needs to provide some evidence. Further, needing support does not give a person a free pass to indulge in bigotry unchallenged. If one needs support, then it should go without saying that they respect and recognise that other people need support as well. Otherwise, their expectations are unreasonable. Support in any community situation is not a one-way relationship. Support needs to be mutual, and as such, people expecting support as atheists can be expected to be supportive to other atheists immaterial of their gender, sexuality, race, or whatever else.
And I don't really find that very constructive. Yes, sure, you can stand behind, you know, your little moral positions and say, well, no, why should we share a venue with people that have bigoted beliefs? You can, but then you're going to achieve nothing.
Well, no, you'll have achieved creating a space where people don't experience bigotry. It's absolutely amazing to me that it needs explaining that such a space is a good thing. It may not be a good thing in the eyes of those who feel they are fundamentally entitled to be welcome everywhere and anywhere, but there's no reason anyone should feel obligated to indulge such ridiculous entitlement.
And you're not going to provide the support. And all you're going to do is push these people back again. Maybe push them back into their religion. Push them back into all these other conservative values.
Why would anyone go from believing that the universe wasn't created by some impossible magical being 6,000 years ago to believing it was, simply because someone asked them not to be homophobic? If someone is that irrational, are they really the responsibility of everyone else? Does this person not more importantly need to be taught the fundamentals of free thought than have their bigotries accommodated? An underlying philosophy with Noel Plum's gradualism seems to be that grown adults are somehow incapable of taking responsibility for their own beliefs and behaviour, and therefore it somehow falls upon the rest of us grown adults to not only take responsibility for our own beliefs and behaviour, but for the beliefs and behaviour of other grown adults as well. It seems like a rather unfairly distributed workload to me. We see this attitude a lot with regards to the election of Donald Trump. The right wing are glad it happened, the left wing are horrified it happened. Liberals, or others who dither aimlessly around in the middle, aren't generally happy that Donald Trump got elected either. But they place the blame not on the people who voted for him, but rather on the left wing. They seem to think that the left wing weren't subtle enough or gradualist enough, and that somehow this pushed people towards voting for Donald Trump. Heaven forbid that we expect a bunch of grown adults to take responsibility for their own actions and to make sensible choices as to who they vote for. No, apparently those of us on the left not only have to take responsibility for our own behaviour, we have to also accept responsibility for the behaviour of the people on the right as well. By Noel Plum's logic, if I identify someone's behaviour as racist, I can't simply call this racism out. No, I have to waste huge amounts of my time trying to figure out a way of calling this racism out without offending the person who I am calling out. And if I'm not subtle enough, this person might just go and vote for Donald Trump or such similar. And that will apparently be my fault, not their fault. Meanwhile, people on the right are free to be as abusive, obnoxious, inconsiderate and bigoted as they please, without any expectation whatsoever from the likes of Noel Plum that they moderate their behaviour in any way, or that they do anything crazy and extreme and radical, such as growing the fuck up. In Noel Plum's worldview, the right can be as abusive, obnoxious, inconsiderate and bigoted as they please because blah 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 freeze peach, whereas the left have to be super duper careful about how they criticise the right because blah 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 gradualism. It shouldn't surprise anyone that this blatant double standard sickens me, not least because proponents of this blatant double standard have the nerve to call people on the left special snowflakes or other such childish language that suggests oversensitivity. People like Noel Plum, instead of constantly trying to guilt trip the left into taking responsibility for the behaviour of the right, could very easily put this energy into encouraging the right to take responsibility for their own behaviour. Unsurprisingly, I will not be holding my breath on that one.
Whereas if you provided them with some support, it might take another year, Andy, it might take another 5, it might take another 10, it might never happen. But their positions might soften on some of these issues, not least because some of those bigotries, some of those prejudices that they had stemmed from their religious belief. And once they're more secure in losing their religious belief, then they might get into a frame of mind when they can start to challenge some of these other positions that they have.
Note Noel Plum's double standard here. He expects people on the left to be patient and wait for those on the right to soften their position on social issues, yet he shows no signs of being patient and waiting for people on the left to soften on their positions. Is it perhaps because he knows that is very unlikely to happen? Noel Plum even admits that this hypothetical homophobic atheist we are talking about here may never give up their homophobia, but he still expects gay atheists to wait patiently for this train that may never come. He thinks asking marginalised groups to make concession after concession after concession in exchange for nothing is somehow a reasonable position to hold.
So I would contrast the approach that was taking place in venues like that, a very, very toxic approach as far as I was concerned, a very counterproductive approach as far as I'm concerned, whereas it was a much bigger tent on YouTube, right? You could have these different views, and sure, if you brought them up, you'd be challenged on them individually, but nobody was telling you just had to piss off or that there wasn't a place for you, because it didn't function like that. Nobody can tell you to piss off. You can still take part, you could still be part of what was going on.
That's because one is the internet, the other is not. The idea that the offline world could or should function in the same way as the online world does is a fucking horrible one. The kind of abuse, harassment, sub-intellectualism and general all-round grotesque behaviour that is so normalised in places like YouTube has no place whatsoever at any kind of serious conference. This really should go without saying, but apparently not. As for this crackdown on bigotry being supposedly counterproductive, how? Because it alienated people like Noel Plum? So fucking what? In recent years, these sorts of events have become more inclusive to women and minorities, including codifying these sorts of policies into their rules. If this causes bigots to have a hissy fit and refuse to attend these events, then far from being counterproductive, that's very productive. Bigotry has no place in any kind of community that aims to be productive. I'm a firm believer that a small number of people working hard towards an aim is a lot more useful than a large number of people dithering around trying to figure out what their aim is and then dithering around further trying to achieve that aim through gradualism. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll be uploading a couple more videos on these topics in the near future. Goodbye.